Welcome to Caregiver SOS On Air, presented by the WellMed Charitable Foundation, with nationally known gerontologist Carol Zernial and award-winning veteran broadcaster Ron Aaron. This program provides health, wellness, and other information for caregivers who are vital to the health and well-being of so many people across our country. And now, here are your hosts, Ron Aaron and Carol Zernial.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the award-winning Caregiver SOS On Air. I'm Ron Aaron. Our co-host, Carol Zernial, is here. Carol holds a master's degree in social gerontology, some 30-plus years experience in that field. She's co-chair of the Raised Family Caregiving Advisory Council and executive director of the WellMed Charitable Foundation. And Carol, this is a really interesting and difficult topic, caring for a loved one who is isolated and resistant to care.
And that probably sounds very familiar to a lot of our caregivers who are listening, the resistant part. And there's so much guilt and misunderstanding and all kinds of things that go into that. So, yes, so happy to have Nancy Meserve with us.
Well, let me take a moment and introduce Nancy. She's an Alzheimer's disease advocate, researcher, and clinical trial participant. She's based in Charlottesville, Virginia, author of the notable study, The Lived Experience of Participants in Preclinical Alzheimer's Intervention Research, published in the Alzheimer's Association Journal, Alzheimer's and Dementia. Rather than working as a laboratory scientist, Nancy's known for documenting and improving the lived experience of individuals participating in early Alzheimer's interventional research. And it's a delight to welcome you, Nancy, to Caregiver SOS On Air. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Ron and Carol. It's I don't pretend to be an expert on caregiving or supporting people who are resistant, but I think just being able to acknowledge that that can be an experience when people may feel that if the normal experience they should be having is to be in this together with a partner, loved one who appreciates every last thing they do. That isn't always the case.
Now, one of the notes that you sent me, and Carol, is a pretty good place to start. If something seems off in someone you know is isolated with limited tools and resources, it's definitely off. Yes.
A lot of people who eventually come to a diagnosis recognize in themselves something is off. I have friends who have said something is off. They know that they have a lot of preserved skills, but maybe their memory is off. Maybe their driving is off. Maybe their finances and their ability to do their taxes is off. And they may talk with partners or family about that. Other times they don't recognize that, but family members are seeing them every day and they start to see that. I listened to your last podcast with the wonderful wife of the early onset Alzheimer's, who recognized for years that her husband was having changes. It's so much more difficult when you have a family member. In my case, it's my older sister, almost exactly 3 years older, who just turned 77, whose basic attitude is, I love you, but I just don't want to see you very much. And I won't be calling you, and I won't let you into my house because she's been a functional hoarder for most of her life. But everything is fine. And people who are isolated, I think, have a lot of motivations for that. But in many cases, I think it comes down to fear, that they fear letting people know that they're vulnerable. They may have sort of unresolved grudges from the past. My sister certainly did. But once you actually, because they're so good at hiding, if you all of a sudden realize, as I did on my sister's birthday in March when I called her, oh, something is off, and said to my husband, I need to go up there next week. Something is really off. So my first piece of advice is trust your instincts. If something is off with someone who's isolated, it's off.
What tipped you that something was off?
Well, I'll call my sister Marie. That's her middle name. She, as I said, had been what I would call a functional hoarder, the kind of person whose house might look like a disaster, but who looked very well put together, better than you did on a usual day, and had many professional roles in her life, was very social. But then about around the time that our mother actually died at the moderate stage of Alzheimer's, with probably mixed Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, and died of congestive heart failure. She was 86 and had lived in her own home to the last 2 months of her life. And during that time, I was a care partner, and Anne, that's Anne, Marie was also a care partner, but really never was able to acknowledge the cognitive changes, just absolutely refused them. And so she didn't handle my mother's death well, and really then became just very isolated. What started to happen a few years ago, I would go up and have Chinese dinner with her, and we would talk. And I realized she was eating slower, having tremors, having difficulty with her gait. And then when I called her on her birthday, she said, "You wouldn't recognize how I'm walking." And I can't find words. And I could tell she couldn't find words. Wow. And suddenly said to me, "Do you think I'm in the third stage of dementia?" I didn't know which third stage she was referring to, but she had never used that word before with herself. So I said, "I don't know, but maybe we should find out."
All right, hold that thought. We're going to find out. I'm Ron Aaron, along with our co-host, Carol Zernial. We're talking with Nancy Meserve. When a loved one who is isolated and resistant to care begins to show issues, what can you do and where do you get help? And Nancy is talking now about her sister, Marie. Carol, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, Nancy, where you led off with if something seems off, something's probably off, because some of us have probably had the experience on multiple occasions where either an expert tried to tell us that nothing was wrong, or we told ourselves nothing was wrong, or some other, the person that we're dealing with. There's so much denial, and you're kind of swimming upstream, and yet in your gut something's off. So I just want to say that is huge. That's hugely important, and we don't hear that often enough.
Yes, and I have friends who have, as you said, they've been swimming upstream for a couple of years, who have finally gotten recently a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. So I would make that point. If you are thinking for yourself something is off, an early diagnosis is your best friend. And unfortunately, Marie, and I'll tell you why it's your best friend, because it will take you a while to get a diagnosis. I finally took Marie to urgent care when I went up in April. She didn't know what urgent care was, but it was a way to get into a doctor, because she had told me last year, when she sounded like she had bronchitis, which was probably fluid in her lungs, said, if it's fine, I don't need to see the doctor. If I ever have problems, I call a wonderful nurse practitioner that he has. Sounded a little sketchy, but I thought, okay. It turned out her doctor retired in 2023, and his entire practice closed, and she hadn't seen him or anybody else since 2018. So she was being very creative about her healthcare visits. But in urgent care, I actually thought she might have bronchitis in April. And it took them about 10 minutes to come in and say, we think her EKG shows the signs of early heart failure. And you have the choice of these two hospitals that are in our system, because we're going to write you a referral and you need to take her there now. So an urgent care visit became a 24-hour stay in the emergency room and being admitted into the observation room, and coming with a thick discharge paper of, you need a referral. You need to see your doctor next week. We don't have one. You need to see a neurologist. We don't have one. You need to see a cardiologist. We don't have one. and you need to see a PT. So that's a reason to try to pay attention early. But urgent care is still a way to get direct referrals to some of those people, especially if you go to an urgent care that is affiliated with a hospital chain, which is what I did where Marie lives. And they referred me to a cardiologist initially who was an interventional cardiologist and made an appointment. And I flew up for that appointment, and then it was canceled. And by saying, well, I came here from Charlottesville for this appointment, I got wonderful customer service. And Marie has back-to-back appointments in the week after next with a cardiologist and her physician assistant, who she's already seen. But the neurology appointment will be February of 2027, even though it's very clear that she is, I suspect, is in the mild Alzheimer's dementia stage.
More than a year away.
Yeah, it's about 9 months away. Yeah, and that's often typical because neurologists are super busy people. She will have an MRI in July, and that will go to the neurologist. That office was actually very nice and said, we will put you in for cancellation if we have anybody. So I hate to say, but I hope somebody has to cancel their appointment now in February.
Well, and because neurology is so difficult to get in, that your story isn't unusual. Hopefully on the physical health side, right, with the PCP or any of the other doctors they've tested, for those things that could look like dementia but are not, like a vitamin B deficiency or severe depression, things like that.
Yeah, and the great news about the physician assistant, she took a lot of time, and she said, we're going to rule out all of those things. So Marie had a whole workup of B12, A1C, liver enzymes, chest x-ray, which actually the next week showed she had bronchitis, actually. But they ruled out all the sort of common things. And the next visit, and I think this is important, if you're looking to get some clarity, I will ask her if she can administer the MOCA so that there is an actual baseline to say, well, this is on just a screening instrument. This is where we see you now. And, again, for Marie, who really didn't trust doctors, hadn't been to a dentist in over a decade, had lost a lot of teeth. This allowed her to begin to say, I care about my health. I don't literally say, I don't want to die. So it was like, well, if you don't want to die, there's a few steps we might want to take. So she is now willing to see all of these specialists. She's willing to go to a dentist and to take a blood pressure medication. And for someone who's isolated, that's a win. And one of the recommendations I always have is scale back your idea of what's ideal and think about what's normal for them and what a new normal for them might look like.
Now hold that thought. We're going to pick this story up in just a moment. I'm Ron Aaron. Carol Zernial, our co-host, is with us. We're talking with Nancy Meserve, the story of not only helping those who are isolated, but helping identify what those issues may be. You're listening to the award-winning Caregiver SOS On Air.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Caregiver SOS On Air. We're delighted to have you with us. We come to you every week with a discussion of an issue, a problem, some accomplishments involved in caregiving with more than 60 million caregivers across this country, but most thinking they are the Lone Rangers. We try to bring you the latest information and help that can make that job easier and more manageable. Caregiver SOS On Air takes a look at trends across this country. We provide tips on how to be a better caregiver, and most importantly, where you can go for help. On Caregiver SOS On Air, we try to give you what you need to make that caregiving manageable and to provide you with the help that can make your life easier. I'm Ron Aaron. Carol Zernial and I are delighted to co-host this program, and we're thrilled you've joined us on the award-winning Caregiver SOS On Air podcast, available everywhere, brought to you by WellMed Charitable Foundation.
Hello, friend. Hello, friend.
Thank you so much for staying with us right here on the award-winning Caregiver SOS On Air, our program on the air on radio stations in Texas and Florida, and we're also on podcast wherever you get your podcast. Nancy Meserve is our very special guest, and we're talking about her work with her sister Marie as an example of what folks can do to help those they love who may not be living with them. So, Nancy, when you got there the first time for her birthday, you flew up. What differences were you seeing?
Well, I was shocked because I had seen her sort of walk slowly over the past few years. I saw her a year ago in June. And at that time, she didn't want to go out to dinner. She said she wasn't feeling well. I had seen her in person. Sorry. I'd seen her in person in April, and she seemed like her old self. So the two biggest changes were that she was sort of coughing nonstop. She was walking extremely slowly, so slowly, and sort of, as she called it, using her arms as windmills to balance herself. So that, and we describing it as shuffling, which to my unspecial knowledge looked a whole lot like Parkinson's. And I had an uncle with Parkinson's. And then she was having significant difficulty with word finding, and she was describing stories that started out in our high school years in Minnesota and then ended up in the time that she lived 30 years later and was working, as if those happened within the same week. And that was really alarming to me.
Now, one of the things you wrote to me is that people living alone often withhold vital information from family and healthcare professionals, and often because they don't recognize that it's a relevant and urgent symptom or issue, which is exactly what your sister was doing.
Yes. And part of that, I think, is that fear of disclosing. And when I said, I'm going to come up, she said, oh, that's horrifying. So I was like, well, thanks for the plug, but I'm going to be there anyway. But when I got there, and she then was able to say, I've been worried that I'm going to die in 2 weeks. My ankles are all swollen, and they've been like that for a year. And I know that I'm not thinking well. I wonder what's happening with my brain. But what I didn't know, because before we went to urgent care, I took her to the grocery store, her favorite one, Wegmans, give them a plug. And she merrily went on her way picking things out, among them caffeine supplements. And I thought, well, she doesn't make coffee. That's okay. I didn't realize she was having 600 milligrams a day of caffeine, which the helpful doctor at the emergency room said that's about like 8 Starbucks venti lattes. It was a huge amount of caffeine. And so that was a huge effect on her heart. She was also taking adrenal supplements. So one of my suggestions is, if you can be around someone, ask them, what are you doing? I take vitamin B12. What do you take? Or go with them to the supplement store, go with them to the grocery store and see what they take. And then see if you can decide if that's, or share that, because she didn't know to share it. It was when I shared it in the emergency room that they about fainted. So yeah, you have to share that because they don't understand. She also didn't know, she stayed in the hotel room with me, and she was coughing throughout the night, and a scary cough. And she didn't know that. And that's a cardiac cough with heart failure. So
wow.
Ask and check out.
Yeah, but I think that's another really great point. I mean, a couple of things. One is you stayed with her. You didn't take no for an answer, even though she was kind of telling you no. And a lot of us have had flat out no's come from someone that we're caring for. And then the other thing is, yes, a lot of times spending time with someone and walking in their walk, so to speak, being in their house. Love the idea. Go to the grocery store. What are they putting in their basket? That's an excellent exercise to see A, how well they're thinking, and B, what are they, when they go to the store, what do they put in their basket? That's fantastic advice.
one of the things I learned doing that was she had, I thought, a lot of endurance. She was walking around this huge grocery store. And then at the time that we were going to pay, she suddenly said, I'm feeling a little woozy. Again, before we went to urgent care, I need to sit down. And so I got her over to a bench, but I was like, that's not normal. But even with that, I thought, well, this is really bronchitis or pneumonia. It never occurred to me that this was heart failure, even though she's about just a few years younger than my mother was when my mother developed heart failure. So start thinking about your family history and see if it might apply to someone who's isolated.
Now, she hadn't seen a doctor in years. Was she resistant once you started hooking her up with primary care and specialists?
That's a great question. It's taken her a while to get to want to see a dentist. We actually drove into the parking lot of a dentist who's about a quarter of a mile from her, two female dentists. What I did was she wanted female providers, and the system that we were working with is very willing to accommodate that. So she has a female cardiologist, female physician's assistant, female PT evaluation today that my other sister, who lives about an hour away, is taking her to, and a female neurologist. I realized that she doesn't have a lot of memory, and her organization system is a big pink bag that everything gets thrown into. So I got her a folder at Staples that says, have an amazing day. And I went to the website of the hospital system and printed out pictures of these women and a little bio, and then put them in, because she doesn't remember appointments. She doesn't have calendars. For her, she doesn't know how these appointments were made. But seeing their picture made her decide that she really liked them. So it's like a memory book that you might do with someone with Alzheimer's. But for her, it's I like these people even if I've never met them.
Did you realize
is your sister alone right now?
Yes, she has lived alone for almost her entire adult life. She's with 6 cats, which is a problem if she ever needed to go into assisted living. And she's absolutely convinced she's not leaving them. So the goal is to try to keep her there. And luckily, my other sister, who lives about an hour away, is very willing to also help out. But again, her normal is she doesn't use computers, email, voicemail, text. She has a phone that's a flip phone that she uses, and knows how to call me, and knows to answer, hopefully, if I call. But she listens to the radio. So it's a very isolated life for someone who in the past was a professional, but it's the life she chose. So I try to respect that.
What's your advice to folks who find themselves in the same situation with a loved one?
I guess the bottom line advice is be there for them. Try to meet them where they are. Understand that they will bring up old grievances. They could be 30-year-old grievances, but start with things that bring them joy. I took my sister to a 100-year-old building made by Italian artisans that she loved, and I thought was a waste of time. We could have gone and looked at walkers, but after she saw it, she was in such a much more agreeable mood to let's go to urgent care. So meet them where they are and give yourself some grace that it's okay to. I came home and cried a lot with my husband, and I ate a lot of chocolate, and both of those things are very helpful.
Well, we've got about a minute.
Chocolate's always helpful.
And before we go, one of the things you talk about is the question about the fear of aging and death, and they may be frightened. And you said your sister said she didn't want to die. Right.
So that was something I could build on. So if you don't want to die, then and none of us wants to die. I shared with her that I have 2 copies of APOE4/4. I have a high risk of Alzheimer's. And I talked about, so instead of talking about death, let's talk about what you'd like for your life and what you'd like maybe at the end of your life. And I think those are important discussions to have.
Perfect.
And one other thing
I have to stop you right there. We are flat out of time. I appreciate you coming on, and if folks want to know more, you can certainly Google Nancy Meserve. I'm Ron Aaron. Thank you to Carol Zernial. This is Caregiver SOS On Air. We'll talk soon.
The executive producer for Caregiver SOS On Air is Daniel Calderon. The producer is Sharice Pendleton. And the associate producer is Catherine Oglesby. We'll see you next week on Caregiver SOS On Air.
You've been listening to Caregiver SOS On Air, an exclusive presentation of the WellMed Charitable Foundation. We welcome emails with suggestions and comments on this program at radio@wellmed.net. Join co-hosts Carol Zernial and Ron Aaron next week for more on caregiving, improving the health and well-being of caregivers and their care recipients everywhere. For more on caregiving and podcasts of our programs, visit caregiversos.org.